Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee is highly critical of the steps being taken to turn the tide. That report says only half of the defences damaged in the 2019-20 winter floods have had their standard of protection restored. It accuses DEFRA of not doing enough to cope with the problem of prohibitive insurance costs or sufficiently helped householders and communities trying to take responsibility for protecting their own patch. Well, James Wild is the Conservative Member of Parliament for Norfolk North West, which has major flooding issues itself, and he is a lead on this inquiry. James Wild, we know about the increased risks created by climate change. We've known for ages. We know about increased housing development. Why isn't there more urgency, do you think, about the measures that are needed to strengthen defences?
Well, thanks, Peter. I think your report just underlined the repeated nature of the flooding that we're seeing in East Anglia. We've had more rain in December and January than we've had for 100 years. This problem is going to stay with us and get worse. So over the last 5 years, £2.6 billion was invested to protect 300,000 homes, and that amount of funding has now been doubled for the next 5 years to over £5 billion. So that is a big chunk of cash, and what we're calling for in our committee is making sure that it's spent more effectively in order to protect and try and prevent the misery that is involved when someone's home is flooded. I've visited constituents in the last couple of weeks who've had to be evacuated from their home because sewage came up from the drain outside the house into the property.
So you're saying it's not actually the cash, it's how and where it's being spent, because it's clear enough who's responsible for doing what. You've got a range of government departments, local authorities, the Environment Agency. So is it that they don't kind of all know exactly who's to take the lead?
That's certainly the experience my constituents are having at the moment, and in our report we call for clearer plans and removing some of the duplication that does exist, because as you say, there's the environment agencies, local authorities, internal drainage boards, the water companies themselves, and what we need is to have a clearer position of who's in charge when things go wrong, so it can be fixed, and also to have plans in place to try and prevent flooding happening in the first place.
Now, your report talks about the uneven response to flooding. Lorna Elliott's home in South Yorkshire was severely damaged by flooding in November of 2019. She's only recently been able to move out of the caravan she's been living in.
We've been out of our house for over a year, fighting with insurance companies. Everything just gets turned on its head. Nothing is normal. Everything is harder work. You have to find somebody to do your washing because you've got no washer plumbed in. At one point, we were washing dinner pots in the bath because you can't really wash a full family's worth of pots in a caravan sink. Everybody in this area has aged 10 years. Because we've got no flood defences, that security is not there anymore. Every time it rains, people are looking out their windows. How much rain are we going to get? There is a well-trodden path to go up to the banks of the river to watch it. We organise between ourselves to go up and see how high the water is. We get forgotten about. We're too far from London. Yes, South Yorkshire has had money for flood defences, but the bigger areas get it. Sheffield gets it. We don't get it. I would say to any MP, unless you have actually lived through a flood, you have absolutely no idea the impact it has on you and your life, because you can imagine it, but you don't know.
That was Lorna Elliott. James Wild, forgotten about was the phrase she used. Now, the Environment Agency's own research last year showed that deprived areas are more at risk from flooding, and yet the amount of money to protect such homes has actually gone down since 2014. Whatever happened to levelling up?
Yeah, this is one of the things we pick up in our report, and the DEFRA and the Environment Agency think that the reason that the proportion of deprived area homes that are covered in the last few years is because projects happened at the beginning of 2010-11, which didn't require funding coming in from the private sector and other bits of the public sector.
Is that true, do you think?
Well, we don't know. And that's what we want the Environment Agency and DEFRA to actually look into this and come back to us, because we need to make sure the funding's going to the right places. If you look at the data, then the Northwest and the Northeast per property do get the highest levels of spending. They get twice what my area of East Anglia gets, for example. So we need to make sure that we are protecting the most vulnerable groups, and levelling up is certainly about Yorkshire and other places, but it's also about Norfolk.
I'm sorry, you'll have to be brief on this question, but I think it's important. Despite all of this, the Environment Agency predicts that house building on floodplains is likely to go on rising. Why? And what should be done?
Well, the government policy is it should only happen in extreme circumstances where there's no option. And what we talk about in our report is how do we make developers fund mitigation measures where that development does happen, rather than leave householders with homes that they can't get proper insurance for and that are liable to flood, and take measures to make them more resistant to flooding, whether that's higher electrical sockets or flood doors or barriers or various other measures that could be put in place. But developers should pay when they're building in floodplains.
James Wild, much to be done, obviously. Thank you very much.